Hey everyone, so for this week's science, what we're going to be learning about is what is a watershed. We're going to think about what a watershed actually is, and if you go online and Google that, you'll find a lot of videos that will all start with a lame joke. Here's the lame joke.
What is a watershed? Is it a shed that holds water? Nah. Try again.
But what exactly is a watershed? A shed for water?
You are living in a watershed. Now, a watershed isn't this.
That was lame. So we're not going to do that. What we are doing instead is we're just going to say that a watershed is really to do with land formation. So this right here is my land. I'm just going to crumple it up. You can do this at home. It's a pretty straightforward experiment, demonstration, model. You guys did a lot of modelling in 4th grade, so this is all to do with modelling. So now I've got my landformer, scrunched it up, and take it out, and I'll end up with a 3D map. You can see my 3D map right there. And I've got certain areas that are higher areas, and then I've got certain areas that are lower areas. I'm going to take out a pen and I'm going to colour on those high areas. I want to show where the high areas, what we'd call a ridge line. So I want to show where the ridge lines are on my newly formed land mass. So here is my map, my 3-dimensional map, and you can see right here we're in the, we can see these mountain ranges, and I've gone along the top ridge lines of those ranges. If I was really going to be pedantic, I might even go down and do these areas right here. If you think about walking along a mountain or a hill, if you've ever been to any mountain ranges, you can actually see that this isn't like an unrealistic model. Those folds in the paper are really creating the folds that we have in our landscapes, and I've just gone ahead and put on them some marker. You can do this at home, as I said. All right, and so the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to, in my little landscape right here, it's going to rain. Let's get some rain. All right, so I have my rain machine right here. I'm going to model some weather. Okay, let's try this. It's going to rain right now. And as we get that rain, you can see what we're really thinking about in relation to watersheds. You can see that we're getting some rivers forming. We're getting some lakes forming down here. I mean, like a really nice river along in here, which goes this way. Now, I'm going to stop right there because that's plenty, but if you wanted to do this activity, you can go on as long as you want. This fold, this central fold, has created a really interesting thing when we're thinking about a watershed. So what we'll notice is that as the marker starts to bleed, it's coming down on this side of that crease line. But some of it is going over onto this side. So I've ended up with two distinct watersheds right there. I have one watershed that comes into feeding this river and lake right here, and then the stuff over here. The water, if it fell on this side, has gone down this way and is kind of moving over there. If it fell on this side of that red line, it's falling and moving into here. This is the idea of a watershed. It's an area of land with one place where the water ends up. So this area here is one watershed. The water, when it falls, all end up in here. This is another watershed. But still will work. When water falls here, it will go into this area. That's one watershed, that's another watershed. Now they may flow on if we imagine our model going further, and they may join up. But right here, they're two separate watersheds. And this is what we see in the real world, where we have folds and higher areas what we end up with separate watersheds. Let's have a look what that means in our local area. So if we look at our local area, I just thought this kind of cool. You can see really how that area right here, we end up with one real big lake on the right hand side of the picture, and then another on the left hand side. Really, really, at this angle you can really see how we've ended up with that mountain dividing our two watersheds. Again, feel free to do this activity. All you need is a squirt bottle, marker, and some paper. Alright, so here we have the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which is the watershed in which we live. So, now, it goes all the way up here to New York, and all the way down here in Virginia. It encompasses Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland. We have ourselves, Washington, D.C. right here. Part of Delaware is the Delmarva Peninsula over here. If you're on this side of the peninsula, you're in the Delaware Bay watershed, but this side is the Chesapeake Bay watershed. For some reference, if you were at Bethany Beach, Delaware, that is over here somewhere. So that's in the Delaware Bay watershed rather than the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Then have Pennsylvania, or parts of Pennsylvania, and parts of New York. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states and the district in our watershed. The water from that area is all supplying this thing here, the Chesapeake Bay. Look at how much bigger the area is than the area of the bay itself. So if it rains all the way up here in New York, the water is going to find its way through a series of rivers and creeks. It'll move its way and eventually come down into the bay, and from the bay it will go into the Atlantic Ocean. So the Chesapeake Bay is fed by these 64,000 square miles of land. Okay, so if you think about it, as I said, it rains in Pennsylvania here, and it goes into one I can see here because of this high land. The water goes down into a river, and it will go from that river and on. So this land here is in more than one watershed. And that's true of everywhere. Everywhere is in more than one watershed. The way I like to think about it is like this. You may have seen these dolls, they're called Matryoshka dolls. And each doll goes inside another doll till you get to the biggest doll. That's kind of the way I think about watersheds. Let's put it right here. We're in this area. And if it rains, our water will eventually end up in the Chesapeake Bay, because the Chesapeake Bay is the area where our water goes to. That's why we're in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So just like the dolls, the Matryoshka dolls, we are in more than one watershed. And each watershed is going to go into the next part of the watershed. So let's look at this map right here. So let's have a look. If we're up here in northwest DC, you have Scott Run, Nichols Run, Potomac River. So Mass Ave is somewhere around here. So that's one watershed that some of you may be a part of, depending on how close you are to this dotted line, which is the Maryland border. You might also, though, be in the Pimmet Run, Potomac River watershed, which is right here. Notice they both have the word Potomac River because they're both going to flow into the Potomac River. It basically means that we have different little, the high land drains to one particular creek here, which is called Scott Run and Nicholas Run. Whereas here, the highland means that the water is going to drain into Pimmet Run. If you're where I am, my family we don't live quite in the same area as you. We're up here in Tacoma Park, near to Silver Spring, in Tacoma, DC, as is the Rock Creek watershed. So our sub-watershed is different to the watersheds over here by Horace Mann. So watersheds are areas where the water will all flow to the same end point. However, we can look at them as being smaller or larger. Both my house and Horace Mann are in the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So we have the same watersheds, but when we get closer and closer and closer, we might end up with different sub-watersheds. So why is this important? Well, if we think about this area, because it's a watershed, all of the water that falls in this area will end up in this place. As water travels, it picks up what we call runoff. that means that anything that is on the land will be taken with the water. So anything that's on the land right here will end up affecting the Chesapeake Bay, even though it may be in Pennsylvania, many, many, many miles from the Chesapeake Bay. And what that looks like is like this. This is a satellite image taken after a long time ago now, 1987, but you can still get the idea of what this shows us, which is right here I have the Delaware Bay, right here I have the Chesapeake Bay. And what you can see is that these areas are more or less populated, and you can see here these are the rivers that are running into the Chesapeake Bay. And you can see here there's the Potomac River, and there's Washington DC right here. And you can see that there's been a major storm, and the storm has taken, when the rain has come off the land, it takes with it soil, and it takes with it sand, and it takes with it any of the other pollutants that are on the land. So fertilizers and pesticides, trash, garbage, and it all flows into the river. And so what we're seeing is that the river at this point is a different color because it is taking all of that sand and sediment down, and it's going to end up coming into the Chesapeake Bay. So our watersheds are important because it's an area where all of the water ends up in one endpoint, and whatever happens will affect that final place where the water is going to go to. So your challenge for today is to go onto Edulastic, use the information that you've been given in this video to answer the questions on Edulastic. You can also, if you want, do the activity with creating your own watershed. And we are going to next think about the geography of this area. You're going to learn some of the names of some of the places. You're going to learn about how they interact with one another.